Good morning. I've been so pleased and impressed by Luke's devotionals where he shows us things in the yard. I thought I'd show you his beautiful work here at the church again. And I meant to say earlier that if you're ever looking or desiring to have a quiet spot to read or to pray, you are welcome always to come by the church. If the chain is in the driveway, you're free to lift that chain or just walk on in and enjoy the beautiful spot here. While we have the good weather, these 4 months in Ontario where you have nice weather, come on by, sit on that nice bench there, look at the nice, what did Luke teach us today, yesterday, the perennials there. I think those are perennials. I don't know, are there any annuals here? Oh, I bet you that's an annual there. Trying to learn things from Luke here. So anyway, I encourage you to come on by. This morning I'd like to read from Psalm 72 for you. So if you want to flip to Psalm 72, I want to begin with a question. What do you pray for? If you think about your life or your family, our church, if you could pick one word to describe the prayer of your heart, what would you ask for? Maybe you'd ask for blessing. Maybe you'd ask for joy. There's many different words you might choose. But I want you to think about that as we read a few verses of Psalm 72. And I believe this was a prayer of either Solomon for his father, David, or perhaps a prayer for himself. But either way, Psalm 72, starting at verse 1, it says, "Give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to a king's son. May he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. May the mountains yield prosperity for the people and the hills in righteousness." And down to verse 7, "In his days may righteousness flourish and peace abound until the moon is no more." I was really struck by those particular verses, these first paragraph of the psalm, and the role that righteousness played in it. I want you to look back at the text again and consider the role that righteousness plays. You'll see that in verse 1, he prays for the king. What does he ask for? Not power or strength, not wisdom, but he asks for justice and then specifically for righteousness to a king's son. So maybe by this point Solomon was ruling himself, and he asks for God's righteousness in his own life. Now, I'm sure that we can all resonate with that. Who does not want the Lord's righteousness? Specifically for us, as we think of Christ and how we desire to take on his righteousness and to be found in him. But what does Solomon have in mind? Well, again, verse 2 then, he speaks of his leadership, that he would judge others or lead others according to that righteousness. So we see that first he prayed for that righteousness, and then secondly, that he asked for it so that he may lead out of it. That as a king, the leadership of that governing authority would be marked by this quality of God. And then in verse 3 and verse 7, he extends the prayer to the entire country, to all the people, speaking of the prosperity of the people and the flourishing of those days. And for both of those, this sense of prosperity and flourishing, they again are rooted in righteousness, in the righteousness of God. And so what was the one word that you might say marks this prayer, again, it is just that, divine righteousness. So what exactly does that mean? Well, we're not going to unpack the word completely today, but suffice to say, the prayer of Solomon's heart here is looking to God and asking Him to guide, again, not just according to His purposes or with His strength, but that the very, shall we say, holiness or truth or purity, the justice, the righteousness of God Himself would extend to the king. And for our purposes, we could think of it as would extend to the leadership, to the authorities of God's people. That God's righteousness and nothing else would so fill our leadership and that which we seek to follow that it would then define the fruit and outcomes of our lives, that prosperity and flourishing. If you ask people today, if you go to the mall and say, do people go to the mall anymore? I don't even know if it's allowed. You say, what does prosperity look like? How would people answer? Probably something related to wealth, not working, enjoying life. Well, what about if you went into churches and asked, what does prosperity look like? And you asked for one-word answers, what would you get? I'm not sure. But in Psalm 72, the answer is rooted in the righteousness of God. And so this morning, as we begin our day, I'm sure you have a long list of prayer items, and they're all good, I'm sure. They're all important needs and concerns that are on your heart, and I encourage you to pray for them with zeal. But I'd like you to think specifically this morning about how the righteousness of God relates to those prayer requests and relates to your life. And ask yourself, are we desiring and coveting that holiness, that purity, that truth of God? Are we desiring that we would be led, our families, our church would be led and filled so that out of our lives, that which characterizes God so clearly, His righteousness, that it would mark us as well. So ponder that, think on that, think about those prayers and how the rightness of God might transform them. Have a wonderful day. May God be with you and bless you. We'll talk to you soon.